Great to have you here
Welcome to the podcast.
with me and my guests from around the world. Welcome to the Simone Feiler podcast.
Welcome to this podcast.
Let's get into it, shall we? On the Simone Feiler podcast. Hello there. Thrilled to be talking to my guest today, Leif Cocks. Leif has a Master of Science. He's a population biologist and curator. He's the president of the International Elephant and Tiger Projects, an international speaker, author of 3 books. He's also the longest standing member of the Australasian Species Management Program, a key player in the development of conservation plans for orangutans. He's a technical advisor for PT Alama, which is a company leasing and protecting rainforests, and the founder and president of the world-renowned Orangutan Project, protecting the habitats and orangutans from extinction. Welcome, Leif Cocks, and thank you for your time today.
Hi, Simone. You're most welcome.
Tell me a little bit about you as a boy, Leif. Where did you grow up and what was your family life like?
I grew up in Hong Kong, which is, as you might know, one of the most densely populated, dynamic cities in the world. And it was, a wonderful childhood.
From Hong Kong, how did you get to be in Australia?
My parents returned to Australia when I was 15. And so, obviously at that age, I came with my parents and, finished off my high school and then went to university here in Perth, Western Australia.
Okay, and so whenabouts did you start working at Perth Zoo? How did that come about?
Well, once I graduated my undergraduate degree from Curtin University, I wrote to the zoo and said, I would like a job, please. And and they wrote back 2 weeks later and said, please come in for an interview. And so that was it for 25 years.
So is that when you fell in love with the orangutans? How did this affair begin for you?
I was working with carnivores and the elephants and the ungulates, the herbivores, and the old orangutan keeper Charlie retired after 20 years, and they asked me to go over and look after the orangutans, and so I jumped on the opportunity and didn't get much training in those days. It wasn't only occupational health and safety, and so I was just given the diet sheets and 2 hours of training of how to work the area and open doors, and that was it. So I was left on my own to discover these wonderful persons that share our planet, and that obviously led to me to be concerned for their individual welfare, but also the survival of their species.
Yeah. What a wonderful opportunity for you. And it would have been quite daunting, I guess, if you've not worked with animals. I mean, you were quite young when you first started there, so just being thrown in the deep end and said, okay, well, you're in charge of these now. It must have been exciting and daunting at the same time.
It was a time that could never be replicated in some senses. Like I used to working with our zebras and just pat them, and of course I found out years later that zebras could be quite dangerous. But I was working with them for years. We used to, and I just started going in and having lunch with the orangutans, and not bothering to have a cage between me and the orangutans. And got to know them as personal friends and develop relationships beyond from between the bars. And these days that wouldn't be allowed. You go to zoos now and there's a big barrier and there's a 1 meter yellow line back from the cage. Don't go beyond this, otherwise an orangutan will grab you. And so you get this kind of very us and them. And I understand why, because orangutans are 7 times stronger than a man, and they, if they want to, they can do considerable damage. But at least I was afforded the wonderful opportunity to get to know these beautiful persons without prejudice and learn how to communicate with them on their level, which was an opportunity that it's very hard to replicate in the modern world.
Back in those early days, did you ever feel threatened by the orangutans, or did you just, was it a mutual, beautiful relationship that you didn't feel threatened at all, because that would be quite daunting as well, having to, interact with someone that's 7 times stronger than you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a bit like, I don't know, if you learn in a sense to interact and connect. It's a bit like, there's some police officers that've been on the beat for 30 years and never been in a fight, because what they've mastered the ability, doesn't make sense, to diffuse situations and interact to avoid conflict, whether some, they're on the job for 2 weeks and, and they're getting the baton out, and so when you're dealing with an animal which is so potentially stronger than you, it really affords the opportunity to develop all those skills of interaction in a peaceful way. And certainly when I was still working at the zoo, I used to always want the other keepers I was training up to go in with them, because you have that better connection, if that doesn't make sense, and it forces them to, doesn't make sense, to see them as persons and connect with them and communicate and negotiate, and diffuse situations at a humane level, where it's far too easy behind bars, doesn't make sense, behind the protection of bars, or if you're a police officer, behind the protection of the law and your gun, to have this power domination, relationship with anything. And so it opens up the necessity, and more importantly, the possibility of mutual connection, by taking away those protective barriers.
Yeah, that's a wonderful description. Thank you so much for that. So then the Orangutan Project, how did that come about? I mean, what was the catalyst for creating that?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first stage was to realize that orangutans are persons, not necessarily humans, but persons nonetheless, and didn't have any rights, and they still don't essentially have any rights, although I've been lucky enough to at least emancipate and give rights to one orangutan in Argentina through a court case, and those efforts to recognize personhood beyond the human species continue on. But not only that, is realize that they don't belong in captivity, and they don't do particularly well in captivity, as all persons don't. And but of course, in realizing that they've been driven to extinction by the loss of their rainforest home and being slaughtered in the most horrible way, and therefore the obligation on myself, and of course in the broader context, the whole of humanity, to prevent the murder and the extinction of these beautiful persons that share our planet. And therefore the need to start the Orangutan Project up as a vehicle in order to enact meaningful change in the world.
One of your goals in 2016 was to secure enough habitat in the rainforest in Indonesia to protect 8,000 orangutans, which is absolutely amazing. And I know that there probably should be a load more on the planet than 8,000. But how is this looking 4 years on?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're about halfway there to achieve the goal. And with anything, especially in conservation, the journey often seems far more circular than linear, going from the outstart to the goal. But we are making significant progress, not only to secure enough habitat, but to leave it within 10 years, not only environmentally, but economically self-sustainable to pass on to future generations. So totally achievable, and for every reason this needs to be done, from global warming to indigenous rights of the local community to the environmental services that support the agriculture in the greater area for which these ecosystem services. So there's every good reason to do this. And the reason is why those numbers are chosen of the minimum requirements for us to achieve in our lifetime is because from a population biologist point of view, those are the minimum numbers we need for the species to survive. If you don't meet those minimum numbers or minimum areas of rainforest or the right type, shape and size of rainforest, we can all go, oh yes, we saved some rainforest, oh yes, we saved some orangutans. but the rainforest ecosystems and the orangutan populations will not be long-term sustainable. So in 100, 200 years, it will go extinct. And so our goal is not only to save rainforest and save orangutans, but save a viable ecosystems in these areas and save viable populations, and therefore beyond our time on this earth, that these populations and ecosystems can live on.
Wow, that's noble work that you and your team are doing with the Orangutan Project, that's for sure. So how many orangutans do you think are still with us today?
Mm-hmm. Look, in the end, there's a huge level of uncertainty because it's very difficult and very expensive to count individual orangutans. So it's estimated based on nest counts, based on extrapolation, based on standard models for nest degradation. They just give you the idea, the framework, how orangutan numbers are developed. But what we do know is, that they're critically endangered, which means that that's a level of category of threat just before extinction. And the numbers are plummeting and continue to plummet as we move forward in time. And so it's really this next few years, or the remainder of my working lifetime, which will determine the fate of these remaining populations.
So how big an area have you secured then?
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about orangutans, and we just talk about that in general terms, there's actually 3 species of orangutans: Sumatran, Bornean, Tapanuli. And with the Bornean, there's at least 3 subspecies, if not up to 5. And all these types of different species and subspecies actually do matter. They're particularly adapted to their particular environment. And my early research, when I was doing my master's thesis, was showing that when you hybridize between these different types of orangutans, you got a weaker orangutan that didn't survive as well. And so it's not that we couldn't just save, 8,000 orangutans. We have to save at least 2,000 orangutans of each type of orangutan, which are very different to each other. And because they're adapted to their particular environment. And so once you dig down, and understand, conservation becomes exponentially more complicated. Yeah. And you see how much closer we are to the brink. Because if you just look at, we've got this much rainforest, but it's fragmented, and each population is maybe unsustainable. And the different populations that may be made out of different species that really can't interbreed and produce successful young. And so it's like, so we not only have to have the compassion and love to save orangutans in the species, we also must have the knowledge and the intelligence in order to enact meaningful actions. Yeah, because most of the time we can do things, especially in the charity world, which doesn't affect meaningful change. It may actually cause more harm than good if we don't intelligently understand the problem we're trying to solve.
So this problem it's absolutely huge. And when you first got into, obviously, when you first fell in love with the orangutans and then you opened up the Orangutan Project, did you actually understand what this whole project encompassed? How much have you learnt along the way?
Mm-hmm. We're learning all the time, and as Albert Einstein once quoted, is what's my knowledge compared to my ignorance. And that's one of the important things to understand, especially with science and the ever-changing dynamic political and economic environment which we face. Is we're constantly learning and adapting in order to affect meaningful change. And so, but on the other side of things is, as we're halfway through the journey to being able to achieve a goal of saving viable populations of orangutans, along the way we have saved and help fund the security of many individual orangutans, which has relieved so much suffering and provide so much compassion and care to so many persons. And so the journey itself is not without meaning as we move to the long-term strategic goal of saving the species and the rainforest that supports them, and of course the entire planet.
Do you have any backing from big businesses, like the main players? Do they help you financially?
No, because the way the human brain works, people destroying the planet have cognitive dissonance, and they're in their own little pool of thinking, and so they don't believe in things in global warming. They believe that makes sense, that they have this kind of mental framework of them destroying the environment, and is actually a good thing.
Yeah, right.
And that's just how human brain works. We can just ignore facts, and then if we're in a self-supporting cult, the cult of big business in this case, they will all get together and say, yes, we're all right. These crazy greenies,
Yeah, trying to
they're
save the
the
planet.
they're the enemy. They don't understand and of course that it's not because they're stupid or not because they're evil. That's just how the human brain can naturally delude itself. So usually from a big business point of view, they're usually, in a sense, in this aspect, deluded about the harm they're causing in the world, because it goes against their own personal self-interest. And that's not unique to big business. That's just what human beings do. They just happens to be, on the wrong side of history. So when they want to interact with organizations such as us, they usually, in a sense, are maybe even greenwashing, or trying to influence and pay off the NGO, the non-government organization, in order to increase their business scope. For example, and that comes down to actually legalities. A business director has a legal obligation to make decisions in the best interest of the shareholders, right? So they just can't give money to the Orangutan Project and not expect a return to the shareholders, i.e. more access to rainforest to destroy. That's their obligation. Similarly, they wouldn't give money to a government, unless their shareholders are reaping the benefit of the government influence from that donation. So that's just how it is set up. So it's very difficult for us to receive support from big businesses because of the psychology behind it. And two, that it's more likely you can do more harm than good by allowing them to continue to destroy more forest, doesn't make sense, under the auspices of helping this small organization achieve something.
Do you think they somehow make it harder for you to get your message across? The mainstream media or big businesses, do they try, well, not that they try to stop you from getting your message across, but do they somehow inhibit you from getting your message across that this is really important to actually save the planet?
Yeah, to some extent. I don't know whether you can say it's consciously or subconsciously, but it's like in the case with global warming, in which we know that more global warming is caused from the destruction of rainforest and all the transport systems in the world, and and the fact that we still talk about the climate change debate, when there really isn't a debate. And so the shock jocks and and the right-wing politicians set up a framework where seemingly doesn't make sense. The actual logic and the science behind it, and argument and direction we need to be moved suddenly becomes something to debate about. Or they create a straw man, if that makes sense, in the sense of let's say if you're an environmentalist, well, you're environmentalist, you must also be a socialist, and if you're a socialist, you must be anti-business. You must so they create this whole framework. Doesn't make sense, and therefore it's not about climate change, it's about we need to support the economy, because if we get these people in, they will destroy the economy. So they create a straw man, by artificially adding to the straw man things which may not actually exist. Of course, the reality is, well, those straw men may exist, but most conservation environmentalists are actually wanting to create a world where we have a sustainable environment that actually produces the best long-term economics and the best long-term standard of living for all beings that share our planet. So it's a win-win situation. But however, that's not how it's often framed. And so people think, let's say they're going to vote. Well, I better not vote for these environmentalists because that's going to destroy my job opportunities or whatever in the next few years. So I better selfishly vote for the coal mine or whatever it is that's going to destroy our planet because I need immediate security. But that's actually not the case. As you may know, fossil fuels are really only competitive against renewables now because they're heavily subsidized by governments, and so these false paradigms which people out of fear hold on to the old investments in fossil fuels and destructive economies, which really have no relevance to creating a prosperous world for future generations and of course ourselves in the long term.
How do you think we then differ from the orangutans? How would the orangutans run the planet?
Mm-hmm. But different to us, I mean, we're heavily related to the chimpanzee, another aggressive ape. We have this tribal mentality, and we can look at the other, and want to destroy them and hurt them, and look at another person and turn them into something to be hated and to destroy. And this is why, you see in America, police officers, can be sitting there beating, and killing their own populations. They're not evil people. They're just humans. You put humans in that tribal situation, us against them, and they will commit atrocities such as war crimes and police brutality. And that's just inherent in our nature. So we have to create systems which obviously placate that problem. However, with orangutans, they don't have that at all. They don't have that ability to look at another person and want to destroy them. They don't have what I call a kill switch. And this is why, if you can compare the orangutans against humans, and we talked about them being dangerous earlier and 7 times stronger than a man, but in all recorded history, in all the rainforests and the zoos and sanctuaries, not one orangutan ever killed a human being. Although we killed over 1 million of them, burning them alive, macheting to them, shooting their eyes out, they've never got to the point where, beyond defending themselves, or trying to, achieve immediate goal, they'll never sit and look at you and want to destroy you and as a person. So in many ways, I talk about orangutans being a more noble form of humanity. And in some ways, it's a shame that they didn't become the dominant species on the planet. We may have a kind of world that we're dealing with now. We certainly have to look at orangutans as probably a more better model for humanity. And certainly we need to overcome our aggressive chimpanzee-like ancestry in order to save ourselves as well as the planet.
The orangutans are the kindest of all the monkeys, aren't they, or the apes? Because the gorilla's also quite angry, isn't he?
And then the gorillas, what I call is your lovable sports scholarships of the great ape world.
Right, sports scholarships. I love that.
Yeah, they're not that bright. Many monkeys are smarter than gorillas. I'll probably have the gorilla lovers coming for me now. They are beautiful and wonderful, but they're not that smart, and that comes down to their biology and how they live. Because having a big brain and being very smart is actually a very risky strategy for survival. The brain takes a lot of energy to keep, so you have to be very sure you can get that energy and nutrients. Otherwise, it's evolutionary dead end. But the gorillas, they're certainly capable of much aggression and have those characteristics, but probably nowhere near the extreme as ourselves and chimpanzees.
I was lucky enough to record your audio book. Thank you for that opportunity. My cousins, my friends, and it's a wonderful book. And it's got such, good information about the orangutans and what you guys are doing, and a little bit of information about you and going forward. what I really love about the orangutans reading your book or doing the audio book was the way the mothers look after their babies. They hands-on for their whole life, and they're just so nurturing. Is this common between monkey species or just to orangutans?
It's one of the unique things with orangutans as the long extent, and there's two reasons for this. You can adapt to the environment predominantly through natural selection, like lots of offspring, all genetically different, and nature selects which one is most adapted to the changing environment, or by culture. And that's how we in orangutan adapt to the environment. So we are born with vacant brains, and through long childhoods, our mothers and communities program the ability to survive and adapt through cultural programming. And so orangutans, being an intelligent species that adapt to the environment predominantly through culture, they have these innocent babies with vacant brains and long childhoods, and they suckle their infants for 8 years. But the other reason for this long maternal close bond is because the more nurturing and secure our upbringing, the more confident and independent we become as adults. And this is true for chimpanzees, this is true for humans. And orangutans live a semi-solitary lifestyle. They live spaced out in the rainforest by themselves and totally mentally as well as environmentally self-sufficient. And to do that, you have to have a lot of self-confidence and a lot of inner strength. And that is created by a very close, loving relationship, in this case with orangutans from the mother. And that makes them mentally very strong. And that's one of the reasons having a friendship with an orangutan is such a wonderful experience, because to human standards, they're mentally strong and self-assured, self-independent. So you have one of the most pure, independent, doesn't make sense, connections with an orangutan, who's not necessarily need you for something or manipulating you for, some social need, as we mostly experience with humans. And so often you have one of the most purest forms of friendship and connection with another person when we've had that with orangutans.
How beautiful. How lucky are you that you get to spend your time with these sentient beings? They sound amazing.
Yeah, they are one of the most amazing creatures on the planet. And one of the ways I connect people and we make money for conservation, I take people on eco tours to see orangutans in the wild. And I don't think there's very rare person that comes back which isn't personally changed by the experience. Not only that deep connection with this noble form of person in the rainforest, but also that we've actually evolved in the rainforest, and in nature. And for a lot of people, they get this experience of almost coming home and that connection to nature and the earth, which we kind of taken away from, I guess, in modern cities.
Do you think that the being with the orangutans steered you towards a spiritual journey in some sort of way?
I'm not sure about that, to be honest, whether there's a connection with my spiritual pursuits, but certainly there's obviously a strong parallel between science as a pursuit of truth, and I've come from a scientific background, and caring for the orangutans is about love and compassion and connection, and in some ways those also parallel the spiritual path, of truth and love, and so it may seem surprising, but there is a great synergy there between spirituality, science, and compassion for other living beings.
Can you describe your spirituality? Are you open to do that?
Yes, but it's a very difficult question to answer. It's describing spirituality. What I understand is that beyond this world there is unlimited love, joy, and conscious connection, which we all are, manifestations of. And so for me is I see all living beings as my own self living another life. And so spirituality to me is breaking down the false separation between us, yeah, and as expressions of the one living consciousness.
That's so cool. That's how I feel about it as well. And you hear more and more people are actually leaning towards that. So I think we don't know, but I feel like that there's truth in that for sure. Do you meditate, Leif?
These days, how I see meditation is not a practice you do sometimes in the day, but it is a constant state of being that you take with you at all time. So never losing that connection with the love, joy, yeah, and inherent awareness which connects us all. And so meditation becomes not a practice, yeah, or a part-time occupation, but becomes the reality for which you live your entire life.
Do you feel like you're in that state most of the time then?
I think that it's how I experience consciousness is sometimes you're there and there's this in some sense in an unmanifest area of unbridled peace, and when that consciousness manifests itself through us as beings into the world, and if it remains relatively unfiltered by our personality and desires, it expresses itself as pure love and joy into the world, and so therefore your relationship with the world becomes one of wanting to help and benefit others, because what's in our internal world, whether we like it or not, naturally expresses the external world. So you can go try to save the planet or the orangutans, and if you're miserable inside, you eventually that misery will manifest itself and destroy what you're trying to achieve. And this is why I always say is we have to reform ourselves before we can really reform the world, because our internal world will always naturally, whether we can fake it for a short time or not, express itself in the external world. And we need to have the internal change within us if we're going to see any meaningful outcomes. And you might have picked up on my earlier conversation about, let's say, big businesses destroying the planet. I hope you picked up that it was born in the construct of no criticism and compassion and for love for even those people who are doing the wrong thing now. I feel that's a way to achieve meaningful outcome, and rather than falling back to the paradigm of separation of us and them.
Well, hopefully we're all getting closer to being able to look within and to, being able to achieve that peace and joy and love feeling moving forward, because if we don't, it could be, obviously dire for the whole planet. I'm going to go back to your goals for 2016, securing the habitat in the rainforest to protect 8,000 orangutans. Congratulations, because if you're halfway there, that is absolutely amazing. Is that one of the goals that you're still concentrating on? Are there new goals that you're working alongside with that particular goal?
Yeah, what we're trying to do, and the goals and the challenge changes completely all the time, because you can have something forest which is a national park, then it becomes a palm oil plantation. You can have change in the policy. So there is a constant dynamic. So there isn't in this utopian example that we plant this tree, we save it, we move on. The world, unfortunately, is far more complex to that. But what we're trying to do, and this is why we started the International Elephant Tiger Project, there are some species such as elephants and tigers which are falling out of the protective umbrella of orangutan conservation. Elephants and people are still killing each other because the big multinationals take the majority of land, and the local villages and the elephants are fighting over the last remaining lowland forest where they can farm and survive. And so we had to work out ways of them coexisting together, and we had to work out ways of counteracting these illegal crime syndicates moving into rainforest to poach the remaining tigers. And we also, for example, in one of the ecosystems that we're working with, we're feeding the children, because the children were malnourished because the parents can't find enough food anymore. And the children can't learn because they're malnourished, So we're actually feeding children and then developing, making sure the kids are okay and the education and health are sorted out. Then working with local community to develop agricultural systems within the rainforest where the community becomes rich and prosperous and the rainforest remains safe and connected. And the wonderful thing that we're discovering is these are all win-win situations. It's wildlife versus people, environment versus economy. Big business model is unsustainable forms of monoculture, which takes the profit from the long term to the short term, from the many to the few. So they're not actually creating any more wealth. They're just concentrating it in time and in people. Yeah. But what we're doing is creating ecosystems where and environments where actually the wealth remains more. There's actually more wealth to go around in a sustainable environment. But unfortunately for the big business don't like that, because the model necessarily dictates that the vast majority of money goes to the vast majority of people, and therefore it doesn't make good sense for shareholders.
But it would be, ideal, like you just said before, that the way that you would be running the place is that everybody would benefit. It's just, disgruntling to think that that it's so hard to change the way it is.
It is, and we have to address some fundamentals. One is we have to realize political donations are all simply can be categorized as bribes. Companies and wealthy individuals are not silly enough to give money to politicians unless that in the end favors interests, And of course, not that politicians consciously do this, but you always, in a sense, it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. You always start favoring in your circle, doesn't make sense. And you think we're taking the money to elected, and we actually also believe in that too. So it's not that I'm saying that this is, in most cases, a conscious corruption, but it is, in a sense, it's a subconscious corruption of the system. And when that's combined with the fact that we're losing the freedom of our press as well, the key pillars of democracy, the independent judiciary, independent press, and politicians free of subconscious, unconscious influence, of special interest groups. And until that happens, it's very hard. It's a bit like a politician suggests carbon tax, and that destroys them economically, or says there should be a fair wealth sharing from the mining industry, then they get destroyed politically. So it's very hard when the institutions of democracy are being eroded, for people who are looking to make a better world for everybody to gain influence.
Do you feel alone in your quest? I know you've got a really good team around you, but does it sometimes feel really tough doing what you're doing?
Well, it's certainly a tough gig, but there's two aspects to that. Is because, at least from my way of thinking, is you gain all your happiness from within yourself, and then you express that. And so you're not necessarily victim to the ebbs and flows of problems and cycles within, because you naturally have to express your love in an intelligent way in order to achieve the aim. So you're not so much affected by the natural problems and issues that come up, especially with such a problematic thing such as conservation in today's day and age. The second aspect to that question is, one of the reasons that we're so successful as species is not because we're actually pretty effective on our own, but we can form communities and we can work together, and coordinate. And so what I do is, is I surround myself with wonderful, good people, who is with skills and that sort of stuff. So my success is not really based on any particular ability of my own, or if I have any success, it's purely my innate human ability to bring together and attract people with skill and intelligence and dedication.
That's great, and I think that's probably what everybody should do, is bring people around them that make, or on the same, or not the same level, but have the same intention, to make the world a better place, I guess, for our future generations and for also all the species on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go to COVID now, Leif. How did the COVID-19 situation impact you spending time with the orangutans? Because you spend a lot of time in Indonesia. So how did that go for you?
Well, I'm kind of actually stuck in Perth, Australia.
Yeah.
I can't even leave the States. So it's been a double problem, in the sense is I can't go to Indonesia to where the projects are. And I can't even travel to raise money, through eco tours and talks and that sort of stuff. So it's a double whammy, if that makes sense. And what we've seen is, and this is not just unique to the orangutan experiences, two criminal organizations are using the vacuum in order to upscale the destruction of the environment through poaching and deforestation. And also you see governments are also, because we have a lot of right-wing governments, and they're using it to actually dismantle environmental laws, and dismantle even existing frameworks to mitigate global warming. So we see COVID-19 as not only destroying income, it's actually a result of deforestation and illegal wildlife trade. Is a result of the destruction of the environment. And then in reaction to that is it seems governments are moving to up again the rate of destruction of our planet, which will cause more pandemics, which will cause more global warming, which will cause more suffering, which will eventually destroy our economy, because an economy can only survive on a sustainable environment from which it can extract wealth from. So it is a very difficult time at the moment, both strategically globally, but also in our small part of the mission to make the world a better place, to save the rainforest.
So the global lockdown, I was kind of thinking maybe it's a good thing for, well, in particular for the orangutans and the animals, because, we're not out there making so much pollution. I've seen on telly, but, you take very lightly what telly says, that, there's parts of the environment getting better. Do you not think that's happening? Do you think the global lockdown hasn't been good for the animals and the species and the environment?
No, no. I mean, you're right. Certainly, there's a reduction in pollution that has come part of that, and however, the destruction of the environment is looking like it's accelerating under the world is distracted, and authorities are not moving around so much. And it seems to me is when I hear about the planning and especially the deregulation of environmental laws and reinvestment into the archaic fossil industry, as ways of stimulating the economy post-COVID-19, instead of actually taking the opportunity to move to the new industrial revolution, which is the shared economy, which is the green economy, which is renewable energy, which is online. And so you see those who have unwisely invested in the old industrial revolution, of fossil fuels and centralized power, using the opportunity to ensure their investments pay off, at the expense of the real economy and the economy of future generations, and
Of everything, basically.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty devastating. So what about, how do you feel personally? Like, I mean, all of that is bad enough, and, it's dire, actually. I didn't realize that was going on behind the scenes just quietly, because it's really hard to look into it, if you're not sort of really looking into it all the time, although I watch YouTube and various people have said there's quite a bit going on, but certainly I didn't hear that was a bit of an agenda. But on a personal level, you must be missing your friends, those orangutans in the forest.
Yeah, no, it'd certainly be wonderful to get back when the opportunity comes again. So yeah.
Do you think the opportunity is going to come?
Well, look, we can only plan with the best information that we have available, and even the decision makers who control borders and don't have all the information they need to make decisions. So, at the moment, I'm planning to, at the end of this year, October on, is to travel within Australia to start up fundraising, and then in March go back to Indonesia.
If you had the opportunity to be, like one of the main speakers on the planet, and then you had the attention of everybody on the planet for a couple of minutes, what would you say to them?
Oh, it's very difficult, because it's like with any audience, you need to assess where your audience is at, and talk to their values, and move them from connecting with their values, and priorities in order to move forward. Look, I think the main message is look, after what we've seen, a disaster can go two ways, and we've seen, like, after devastating World War One, Europe mainly fell into fascism, because people are stressed, and they have this desire for the strong man to come along and sort the situation out, and to blame other. Does it make sense? To have this nationalism and blame this other enemy, and we're seeing this all over the world now. So, but also we also saw in America that during the crisis they had what they call the New Deal, which basically was, in fact, the great was actually socialism. I know Americans are very much hate socialism, but they actually had one of the greatest examples of working socialism that ever happened, which was a New Deal, where they said, we're going to, create these institutions and framework for the common person to be prosperous, as well as businesses, and that actually created the most prosperous time and place ever to exist on the planet today. That New Deal, and that New Deal has been slowly eroded since the 1970s, as well as the in a sense the standard living of in this case Americans. So my message is we have an opportunity now to go either way, to what they're calling a new Green Deal, where we can rebuild the economy in a way that works for future generations and everyone on the planet, including businesses in the long term, or we may risk falling into some level of fascism. And we're seeing in Australia where we're no longer considered, in a sense, and by people assessing it, an open democracy anymore. We're losing some of our freedoms, with new laws and regulations. So you can see that slow slide into fascism already occurring as one of the reactions, to a time of crisis. But we could go the other way, and the Americans have given us a wonderful model how that can actually go the other way, and we can get ourselves into a wonderful, prosperous time for everybody.
And do you think that might happen?
It certainly could, and we don't know. These things. These things are often on a knife edge. And so it's a fantastic time to work as hard as we can. As I say, I've got 10 years to save these ecosystems. Otherwise, there may be rainforest orangutans, but they will be unsustainable. We've gone too far. Similarly, we have this opportunity, this once in a generation opportunity, to build a better place for everybody, where businesses, people, and communities and the environment can prosper. So yeah, if we can take the opportunity now, it could be wonderful. If we lose it, it could be a long time, a lot of destruction, and too late before the opportunity comes around again.
So what can people that are listening do to jump on board this new opportunity? You know, where do they look?
Look, I think it's a very difficult question. It's because there's two wings of the bird, I say. One is you have to have the compassion and love. Does that make sense? To make meaningful change. So if in your thinking, there's always the other, horrible big businesses or refugees or, or the other race or religion or the other political party, if your thinking falls into that, please pull yourself out of it. You can't affect meaningful change. So you've got to have that love and compassion for all, in order for you to make effective decisions. The second half is you have to make this genuine desires for the welfare of other beings. You've got to make it intelligently. So you've got to become educated. You got to know what you're talking about. I mean, I know when I watch TV sometimes, it seems to me that they always get a lot of people on board who don't know anything about a subject to offer their opinion. And it seems that people's opinion seems to be as worth as other people's facts, as equal weight. And so we have to make sure we don't fall into that, that we just have an opinion, based on our cult and our little bubble, our understanding of our community, that we actually have the intellectual bravery, I guess, to look at all the facts and change our minds if we're wrong, and say, yeah, I held that belief for 20 years and gee, a bunch of facts came along. Time to move and embrace a new facts. So that intellectual honesty, and not to be one of the things we've seen with, let's say, the studies of people. One of the main things is to see that the power to change the world is within us, not that kind of feeling that we're a victim, that the world is this powerful place as that we can't actually affect change. We can. And so don't give away that power to anybody, feel that the power that is within us to change our worlds, our communities, and together, change the whole planet.
And you're a testament to that. I mean, you're doing something. You have been for many years with the Orangutan Project, and, slowly but surely you are doing something, and hopefully that you'll be successful in your mission. And I think right now is the time, well, I'm hearing a lot that people are waking up. So hopefully that's the truth. We are waking up and working out that we are really, one entity working hopefully towards the same thing for the good and the benefit of everybody. I'm loving chatting with you, Leif. Hey, you're a very knowledgeable man, and you can tell that you're very compassionate. And, I don't know whether that comes from working with orangutans or your team, or this is just your life's mission. So thank you for chatting with me. How can people contact you, and how can people find out more about the orangutan, and what can people do to help you on that mission to securing the habitat in the rainforests in Indonesia and hopefully globally to sustain our planet? It's all on your shoulders, Leif.
Well, I mean, you can come visit our website at orangutan.org.au, the Orangutan Project's website, and you can become a small regular giver, to help the project move on. If you are a person of need, it's obviously a large donation can greatly affect meaningful change. You can come with me on one of my eco tours into the jungle, and once we get moving, hopefully in March, and book now and see the wonderful orangutans. And each night I give a talk, in the forest, and take people on a journey with orangutan conservation. And so it's a lot more than just an eco tour in some senses.
Well, you said before it's life-changing, and it certainly sounds like it.
Yeah, I think many people have found, even people who have lived long and exciting lives, still come back greatly affected by the experience.
From my perspective, firstly, thank you for all the work you do. I really feel like you're incredibly lucky having an opportunity to work with the animals the way that you do. And you've really given me a good insight, and I hope to our listeners, I'm quite sure, about the task that you have to help them for their future generations to still be around, for our future generations to be able to see these amazing beings that are kinder and more graceful and more compassionate than we are, that we could probably learn something from them. Leif, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I've probably chat a lot more and ask you many other questions. Have you got anything that you'd like to say that we haven't covered?
No. I think we've covered everything that you might want to cover as you said,
in a short time,
a limited time that we have in podcasts. But just maybe to finish off is that a life spent in selfless service for others is no sacrifice at all. It's the most joyous, wonderful, and productive way to spend your life. And so there is no sacrifice. These are always win-win situations. So don't be afraid of working for a better world in the spirit of love, and unity, because it's a wonderful way to spend your life. Because people often talk, you've sacrificed a lot to help save the orangutans, and I laugh too, because I've gained the world. I see people sacrifice their families and their lives and their sanity for to working for some material end, which in the end they discover will give them no benefit of happiness. They are the true people sacrificing in the world, and we need to help them. Whether selfless service for the love of other beings is gaining so much, and I just hope that other people will gain that themselves, just selfless, intelligent expression of love in this world.
Well, I hope to be on that mission as well, and I hope to talk to more people that have the same feeling that you do, Leif, because I totally agree it's about service to others, and that's the way we're going to change it, by understanding that for the good of all.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, I'll let you go back to saving the habitat in the rainforest and the orangutans, and I hope that you get to see your beautiful friends soon. Hopefully the borders will open up sooner rather than later, and you can get back onto that mission, because if they're doing stuff, while it's all in lockdown, then that's not good. But great talking with you, and I hope to talk to you again, and we can have another chat for my next podcast series.
Sounds great. Thanks, Simone.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And my guests from around the world.
Thank you for being a part of this show.
The Simone Feiler Podcast. Catch you next time.
It's a wrap.